All right, are we live? We're good to go. All right, well, welcome to Coffee with a Missionary. So glad you're joining us this evening. We are excited to be talking about women in missions, and we have some special guests joining us tonight. My wife, Mel, of course, should be on this one because we're talking about women in missions, but unfortunately, she is not able to come on tonight. So I'll be representing the men in the conversation, but really, honestly, the whole point of this video is just I'm just being a host to allow Melodee and Tara to speak from their wisdom. And welcome to our first viewer watching with Coffee with a Missionary. And we're gonna introduce our first guest, Melodee Gruetzmacher, in just a second here. But I want to encourage you as you're watching. We want to hear your voice in the conversation. Oh, here is Melodee. Hi, Melodee.
Hi, how are you?
Doing wonderful, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a privilege.
This is so cool. Where are you currently in the world right now?
I am in Mexico City, just a small little city.
Yeah, Pueblo.
Yeah, just a few 20 million or so. Yeah.
That's amazing, wonderful. And you and your husband Larry, how long have you been missionaries in Mexico?
We first arrived in Mexico in 1993. So it's been I don't know if I can count that high.
We won't ask you to. It's not math.
Thank you. Thank you. But yeah, our calling has been to this city, and this is where we've served and where we raised our kids. And yeah, here we are.
That's amazing. So why don't you just take a minute or two and kind of introduce yourself and your family and your ministry?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm actually a missionary kid. I was raised in Costa Rica and Panama, and lived there from the age of 6 to about 17. And then went to North Central in Minnesota and met my husband Larry there. And his plans were to be the oldest youth pastor. He was going to be a youth pastor forever. And that sounded fine to me. And we started taking missions trips with our teenagers, with our youth groups. And it was on a missions trip to Mexico City that the Lord spoke very clearly about the need of the city, and that our calling was to Mexico City. And so we have worked in the area of church planting a lot. I have a master's degree in education, so I worked a lot in the kids with our kids schooling, helping a lot there, and teaching in Bible schools, and so now we planted a couple of churches along the way. So served as pastors and planters, and then this last term now, the last four to 5 years, we've been working with ISUM, which is the Advanced Theological Training program that's throughout all of Latin America, and that takes us then to usually 5 or 6 different countries in Latin America, as well as here in Mexico, teaching for 2 weeks at a time in a variety of settings, Bible schools usually, and Larry and I go together and teach for those 2 weeks, and then continuing always with the focus on church planting here in Mexico City when we're not traveling. We have 2 boys that were, when we first arrived here in Mexico City, they were 3 and 8 years old. And so this is where they grew up and graduated from high school. And now they're both grown, and one of them lives in Las Vegas, one of them lives in New Zealand, and we have 3 grandchildren and 1 on the way due in August. So
awesome.
I can't believe that all this time has gone by. And here we are, still in Mexico City. So
that's incredible. Yeah, it was wonderful. Well, we're so grateful that you're sharing your wisdom with us. And if you're just joining us on Coffee with a Missionary, this is Melodee Gruetzmacher, her and her husband Larry, missionaries in Mexico City. And we're so excited to hear more from you. But first, we want to invite our second guest that we're having on tonight, and that is Tara Kenyon. And Tara and her husband Garrett serve in Panama. And so welcome, Tara.
Hi, Noah. Hi, Melody.
This is so awesome. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Absolutely.
Share a little bit where you currently are, and you actually broke away from a missions team to do this video.
Yes, we are on our fourth team of the summer already. My family and I, my husband and my two little boys, my husband's Garrett and my son's Malachi and Titus, we are in the country of Panama, in Panama City. And we are 2 weeks from celebrating our 9-year anniversary here.
Wow, incredible. Wow. Yeah. Can't believe that time flies, right?
Absolutely. We had only one little 2-year-old when we moved here, and now we have 2 big kids.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, real quick, just because this picture is up, you mentioned that you're in Panama, but I saw this on your Facebook with the Mexico flag, and I just had to, put it in there, pulling you closer to Mexico. I mean, this is just proof that you're headed to Mexico.
Yes, I did have a standing invitation from your last superintendent. We're welcome to come to Mexico anytime.
Oh, that's amazing. So why don't you maybe a little further, I don't know if you did, but kind of expand a little bit, introduce yourself, your family, and what you do in Panama.
Yeah, as I said, we've been here 9 years. We came here to do student ministry, primarily evangelism in the public schools of the nation. We had an open door invitation from the Ministry of Education here. They asked many of the evangelical denominations if they could provide ethics and character training on an ongoing basis as a free service to the public schools. And so we've been able to take advantage of that opportunity. And now we've been ministering in the high schools of Panama City for all of these years. We recently have opened up our ministry is called El Refuge. It's like Spanglish because everything in Panama is a little bit of Spanglish. Okay. And so it's not El Refugio and it's not the refuge, it's El Refuge. And so we have a ministry center where students can come after school and get homework done. And just primarily the function is to be a safe place to avoid the really dangerous hours that teenagers experience going home in the hours after school before family gets home. Those are really high risk times for marginalized communities. And so the refuge is just a safe place that they can do homework and be with healthy adults to mentor them and walk with them in life.
That is so exciting. It's so cool. And we love to hear your wisdom as we continue through this. And so we're going to bring Melodee Gruetzmacher back on, and we're going to have a discussion here. Really, we're just going to hear from both of you guys' wisdom. But before that, do we have any comments to get to, or anyone saying hi? Claudio Lapidas Luz. Good job, David and Carol Ellis. Okay. All right. Thanks, Claudio, for saying hi. And anyone else who's tuning in, we want to encourage you. We want to hear your questions. Also, if you would just leave a comment and your encouragement to women in missions, anything you have to say to encourage those, and we'll pass that along to the LAC women. But first, I want to ask you guys to talk just briefly about your missions journey, specifically from your perspective as a woman. And so, who wants to start?
Tara, you want to go ahead?
Sure.
Okay.
To kind of summarize my mission journey, for some reason, when I was in high school, I had a preconceived idea about missionaries. And I knew I was experiencing a call to ministry. And I kind of told the Lord, as long as it's not being a missionary, because missionaries are kind of weird, like socially awkward. And so I think that they only go overseas because they can't really do ministry with people who would notice that they're weird. And so that was kind of my perspective. Who knows where I came up with this? I'm an only child. I have a lot of military time to think about wacky things. But I went on my first mission trip overseas to the nation of El Salvador and worked with Don and Terry Triplett. And when I met Don and Terry Triplett, I was like, oh, wait, these missionaries are awesome. If this is what being a missionary means, if this is the kind of high function world changers that being a missionary means, then I want in on that. And, it was kind of cool. I think just last night or the night before, Terry posted a picture of a Wisconsin team. I'd gone down with Wisconsin AIM, Wisconsin team of like 6 or 7 students who were answering the call to missions. And so I jumped on and said, that was me 23 years ago. Wow. And so that was when I felt a real call to missions. Now, once I experienced that call, I knew that I wanted to be a single missionary because kind of my own growing up background, I wasn't really interested in getting married at all. And I was less interested in having children. And so I was going to be the strong, independent missionary, single missionary. And that was kind of my plan all through North Central. I never dated anybody, no boyfriends, no interest, nothing like that. I mean, I went through periods of being boy crazy, don't get me wrong, but no interest in getting married at all. And I went to a bilingual church during my time at North Central because I knew that God was calling me to Latin America. Now, at the same time, there was not anybody while I was in North Central kind of encouraging missions to Latin America. So I felt like I had to defend my call a lot. And wouldn't you know, this missionary in residence came during my time there named Melodee Gruetzmacher. I think just one semester and taught a couple of our classes. And I was like, this is it. This woman has a master's degree. She's ministering in Latin America. It has value. There's a place for me. And I think that's so important, is seeing somebody that you can relate to kind of encourage you on in your own journey. And so about that time, I think just about directly about that time is when I met Mr. Kenyon, who was younger than me, and convinced me that I did actually want to get married. It took a lot of convincing. And he also was nurturing his call to missions in Latin America. So I conceded that obviously the Lord must have to be that obvious with me to make clear that marriage is an okay choice for my future. And so we graduated from North Central in Minneapolis and went directly from North Central into missions.
Wow. That's like incredible, and so many interesting things about that story, but
little connections everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Yes, in terms of, and the surprise inclusion of Melodee, that she was such an influence. That is so cool. And
I haven't got to see her in 3D person to person since that time. So we have a lot of mutual friends. Her sister spoke at one of our girls' conferences, like so many, cousin kind of things, but I haven't got to see her since then.
I know. That's
great. We need to change that. Well, Michelle Perez says, "What's up, Tara?"
Hi, Michelle.
That's awesome. Fellow missionary. And so Melodee, so maybe talk a little bit about your missions journey then.
It's funny what you should say about social adaptation and skills, because I felt so much that way when I moved back to the States. I moved from Panama to Minnesota in the dead of winter, and I felt just so lost and out of place. And so I kind of, said to myself, I'm going to put down roots here. I have a call to ministry, but not necessarily missions, because I didn't want to be one of those that ran back to the mission field because I couldn't fit in the States. So funny, because it's so much like your perception. Yeah. And so I knew that the call to ministry was there, and it really was, Lord, wherever you want to take us and do with us, I know that will include ministry for me, because that's my heart. And so then when Larry started talking about missions and being called, my first reaction was, those missions trips, you get all excited and get back in the States 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months later, and it all kind of settles down. And so I was kind of like, yeah, and just, kind of sitting back and watching to see how this would play out. And it probably took close to 2 years till I really could see this was the real thing. This wasn't just I'm excited about this trip, but I could see that there was a call. So then I needed to go back and kind of open that door that I'd closed when I left the mission field and start looking at the things I had just kind of buried, and really hear from the Lord again, and kind of lay on the altar all of those things that, it was a great missionary kid life, but the moving, and the saying goodbye to people, and just some of those things that are part of the reality of missionary kid life and missionary life. And do I want to put my kids through that, And, but, I remember being, I think it was at a youth convention in Minnesota, and just kind of finally, surrendering and saying, okay, this is, I can see this is your call. And so let's go for it. So it did require, again, a commitment of, we're going to go and we're going to do this. And of course, I love Mexico City. I shared, Larry and I shared that very much, but needing to just go back and just a place of surrender, of that specific call, beyond ministry to ministry in the arena of missions. So that was kind of my journey to getting to where we are now.
That's incredible, and I know that you have both truncated that, because there's so much more I'm sure to say about your missions journeys, and they're still ongoing. But what was so cool that you both mentioned was different perceptions you had that kept you from entertaining the idea of missions, and even you, Melodee, being a missionary kid, you had your own perceptions to work through. And so I guess kind of a follow-up to that is, are there any other perceptions that have been significant to you as a woman on the mission field, that there was perceptions that you had to overcome, or that God had to work you through, that became barriers or obstacles, I guess, to you really succeeding on the mission field?
I think deciding that we were going to have children was another big kind of mental transition for me. I don't think I've ever been that girl that's like, oh, babies, and let me babysit and do kids ministry. And I don't know, I'm an only child, and I don't know if that kind of influenced that, but just never ever felt like, oh, I need to become a mother. And so I think Garrett married me understanding, like, we're not having kids, and he's a man of faith, so he was willing to take that risk, and just know that he prayed into me. But when we did decide to have kids, then it was really hard. We didn't get pregnant right away. We were a couple years trying to have kids, and then I was struggling with guilt, like, I've cursed my own womb. And I think, through each of these growing phases of, like, the Lord kind of changing my perspective, each time it felt like a little part of me was kind of dying, because, I wanted to be the single missionary woman, because I didn't want a man to speak for me. I didn't want to have to, have that advocate. I wanted to just do things myself, independent by nature. And again, only child. And so I'm kind of a go-getter, and I didn't want to be oppressed by a man or anything like that. And that's kind of the only option I thought that existed. So meeting my husband and kind of falling in love, and he's just the greatest champion of me in ministry and women in general. He comes from a long line of strong women in ministry. And so it's completely natural for him. And he's empowered me every step of the way. And again, not that, I don't even say that in such a way like I need his empowerment, but just and that was the condition that I could get married under, is being an equal partner in a relationship. I just hadn't seen that before. And so but that was still a part of me, like an expectation and an idea of part of my deal I'd made with the Lord and receiving that call to missions. And then motherhood was another thing, because Garrett and I were accustomed to ministering as partners, as equals. And, he takes a turn, I take a turn as far as preaching and itinerating, all of that. And then knowing that the expectation of a missionary mother is even further down a rabbit hole that I didn't want to go. And so I think that even after I had a strong desire to have children, and and grow our family, I still was struggling with that. Well, then how will my life look as a mother? Because I'm not just a stay-at-home mom. It's not my personality. I don't feel called to that. And so every step along those changing, transforming times has been difficult for me. But the Lord's been there to meet me and to not leave me stranded. And every single one of those leaps of faith have brought me into fuller pastures, greener, more richness of life and ministry, and has expanded the kinds of people that I can minister to and the kinds of heart stories that I can relate with them. And so it's been a really cool experience that you just kind of have to trust the Lord to take you on.
Yeah.
And anything to add, Melodee?
I think that one of the blessings that I had growing up was being able to have role models. There were very strong women role models in missions that I had. David and Doris Godwin. Doris, they're the founders of the Assemblies of God in Panama, and I watched her lead worship and minister equally alongside her husband with 4 kids. And of course, my mom was also a very powerful role model. She did it in a different way. She wasn't quite as much in front of the scenes on the stage, but very, very much I could see from behind the scenes how much she contributed to what was going on. And Mona Shields, who came down to teach in the Bible school, and so I observed and watched her. So I think my perception was that there were probably more opportunities and variety and options for women in missions than perhaps in the, to my point of view, the smaller arena of a pastor in the U.S. And that was my perception. And so I think, again, and like you mentioned, Tara, Larry has always been my biggest champion. He said to me, "You can do things when I often didn't think I could," but he was kind of encouraging me to go out there and work with it. So I think in terms of possibilities, I didn't kind of struggle with that. It was more, how will we manage this? How will we, how will the ministry look like? How will we balance? And, how will we flesh that out when we get into that? And of course, I think there are seasons in life, when you have children and now empty nesters, and I've seen how those seasons really affect how that all works together. But the blessing of a partner who is encouraging and valuing and very much willing to negotiate and work those things out was just made such a difference in how I saw the possibilities that were before me to do.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Those are your responses are just incredible, and there's so much more to talk about within those things. But we do want to get to some comments. Cindy Friend says, "Hi, ladies."
Hi, Cindy.
And we also want to encourage, if you're watching this, we want to encourage you to let us know where you're watching from. And also just an encouraging note for either Tara or Melodee or both, or for the women missionaries who are part of the Assemblies of God and LAC. If you just want to leave an encouraging note in the comments, we would love that. We'd appreciate that. And also, if you share this video, that'll help it reach more people, and more people will be able to hear the wisdom of Tara and Melodee. So that would be wonderful for you guys to do that. So we talked a little bit about perspective shifts, but kind of want to focus. I had given you a question ahead of time about what obstacles do you think that women uniquely face in missions, and how have you personally worked through those? So would love to hear your perspective on that. Maybe we'll start with Melodee this time.
Okay. I think that it is easy to sometimes feel that you are an extension of your husband's ministry, that you are there to fulfill and make possible what he's going to do. and their perspective of partnership, I think it is something that can be a struggle to kind of manage that a little bit. And then of course the reality that we live in a culture, we're ministering in a culture that can be, I mean, it's the term machista is thrown around quite a bit. But I have to say, here in Mexico, we have 3 female district superintendents, which is far more than, I don't think we've hit that mark yet in the U.S. And so, in spite of some of the challenges of culture and how women are viewed and what they can accomplish, I think just over time, I've seen such a shift in the years that we've been in Mexico, and patience to kind of find where the door opens and where God gives you opportunities, and responding to those. And then I think I think that that very much as a couple, you can communicate what that looks like for you together. I think that, we go into ISUM now, and Larry and I go together, but I'm the one that's considered the directora, because I'm the one that's willing to deal with all the administration and paperwork and finances. It has nothing to do with levels of responsibility, or it's just who's going to do all this administration, and that is something that I can see people are watching to see, what does this mean? What does this look like? And so you are sometimes dealing with the perceptions of other people, and you just, kind of work through those. So I guess that would be what comes to mind on my end.
Yeah. I would agree with many of those exact same things. I do find it quite my least number of problems or frustration I feel as a woman in ministry. The least number that I experience are on my field, because Panama's the same way. We have a lot of pastors that are women. We have executives who are women, and that is not as much of a stigma, even though the irony is kind of bizarre, because the macho known Latin culture. But one of my friends, Christy Northup, I remember she was a missionary kid, and she told me, in English, it's just pastor. It's Pastor Garrett, it's Pastor Tara. Like, people get uncomfortable. They don't really know what to do. But when you're working in the Latin context, you have pastor and you have pastora. And it just kind of makes sense. We have a special name that is equal and identifies us equally. And so I do feel a lot of some of the frustrations that I feel. Oftentimes, some of the more frustrating things I've experienced have come from other women in ministry who think I should not be doing as much as I'm doing, and that my kids are little, and are you sure you should be doing that? And they mean well, bless their hearts, but those are the discouraging things that I sometimes hear. And I don't want to be one of those women. And it's tempting sometimes, because I think that we feel a bit of competition, and we are all trying to establish this norm for women being in ministry. And I feel like the fastest temptation, I've had to consciously overcome it sometimes, is to make sure I never squash another woman to put my own self ahead. And so just knowing, and I'm affirmed by those women that have gone before me and who have made a way. And I have had more women in my life open big doors for me than the men have. And so that's something that I want to continue to be, that kind of person who is conscious of young women who are feeling that call. And sometimes there is a point when, you have to take a little bit of a jogging lap rather than the sprinting lap, so that you can nurture your kids differently. And not that because that's your only job, but your kids need both mom and dad. And so I'm, again, married to a man who is completely paternal. He does not actually need me to help him with our children at all. He cooks for us and does our laundry and treats our stains and all of those kinds of things. But my kids do need their mom. And so just finding that balance, like Melodee was talking about, negotiating between the husband and wife, Another thing that my friend Christy Northup has told me, she's getting a lot of quotes today. I remember, I think it was a time that she preached at North Central when she said, if you're a young woman called to ministry, be sure that you are paired. If you're going to be married, be sure that you are with a partner who is not intimidated by your call and who is confident and secure enough in their own call that that's not going to become an issue. Because I think to be a woman in ministry, it does take that male advocacy, because you can't just squash over your own spouse either to get ahead, to do your call and the ministry God's called you to. That's not an option either. It has to be that negotiating and that give and take. And sometimes I stay home, sometimes he stays home, and sometimes those times stink, but you do it to be fair and respectful of one another and what God's called us to uniquely. So that's something crazy that some of my biggest champions and women that are opening doors for me are women. It's the Mona Ray Shields giving me opportunities to learn new things and grow in areas that I'm really passionate about, and Mary Mann giving me countless opportunities, introducing me to people who have the influence to put me in places that I want to be able to share. And so, but at the same time, it's often well-intentioned women who kind of put those dark clouds around you. So that's, I think, something that's really key as a woman in ministry, is to be sure that you're very aware of how powerful your words are to other women in ministry, because we are each other's greatest champions or worst crushing critics.
Yes, that's really good.
Yeah, that is amazing stuff, and I'm learning so much as a man on the outside, listening in. But I did grow up with 3 sisters and no brothers, so I got used to having to be around women a lot and learn from them. So I love
and your sisters are strong women.
they're very strong women. I'm thankful for them. Thank you for all that you mentioned, and just I think you said some really important things, and I kind of wanted to follow up with this idea of a husband and wife really working together as a team. And if you're married, there's single men and single women in missions being very successful of all ages. But specifically when we're talking about a married couple in missions, to what extent do you think the generation you're a part of affects your ability to kind of do this give and take? Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's a great question. I'm trying to think. I don't know if maybe because I'm the older generation and I refuse to think that I am.
You're not the older generation. Sure.
But I do think that as time has evolved, there has been more and more of a shift towards seeing equality in marriage and roles for both people. I guess there may have been maybe a little bit more emphasis on stay at home, maybe in my generation, although I don't know. I mean, I look at our area directors, Paul and Sandy Kasem, and Sandy is just such a champion of women just flowering into the ministry that God has called them to, and again, opening doors for them and encouraging them, and they would be of our generation. And so I don't know how much it's a generational thing. Maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily, I would say more than generational, is our own culture, American culture. And I think in every generation, it takes a little bit of a unique pair, the personalities of the man and the woman to make the woman in ministry feel empowered and an equal part of the ministry. I don't think it has much to do with generation as it does individual personalities. Okay. And so, that's what, even when I mentioned, my friend Christy Northup and her saying, like, be sure that somebody that you're marrying, is going to empower you as a woman in ministry and not be jealous and intimidated by your call, because but I don't think that has to do with generation as much as it does just our own American culture.
And I guess I would add to that too, if you go back in missions and you look at some of those pioneers, some just really powerful. I mean, I remember my mom driving this Speed the Light old truck that had this manual transmission.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And so I think, you know, even when you go back that far, you see women that just were the pioneers and were just right in there as well. Sometimes in situations that are much harder than what we face today, you know, so side by side as well. Yeah.
That's awesome. And really that's a great segue into a little section we're going to do called Famous Missionaries of History. And so we're going to give Tara and Melodee a brief break, and I want to talk about a famous woman from AG history. Her name is Alice Luce. And Alice Luce was a missionary. She was actually a born in Britain, and she was born in the 19th century. And she grew up in an Anglican home, Church of England. And she ended up was in India, a missionary to India with another society. And she ended up encountering missionaries and who believed in the Pentecostal outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And her life was changed. And she ended up coming back to the U.S., became a credentialed AG missionary and minister in 1915. And so this is a woman who was a credentialed ordained minister in 1915. And she felt a call to Mexico. She felt that God was calling her to be a missionary to Mexico. And so she was going to go, but it just so happened that at that time, the Mexican Revolution just came to the fore. And so she wasn't able to go to Mexico. She ended up ministering to Hispanics in the U.S., doing evangelization in Texas, also in California. And she began to write and became really the first Assemblies of God well-known missiologist, which is someone who studies missions. And she wrote a few articles in the Pentecostal Evangel about St. Paul's missionary methods that really defined the way that the Assemblies of God does missions and has done missions for our history. And it was through the writings of Alice Luce and this woman back in the beginning of the 20th century. And so I wanted to sneak her in today as we're celebrating women in ministry and in missions, and as we're talking about talking to two wonderful ladies. Also wanted to mention that she started Berean Bible Institute in San Diego, California, which has now become Latin American Bible Institute, Assemblies of God in La Puente, California, that still exists today. So that was all began by a woman in missions and Assemblies of God history, Alice Luce. So that was my commercial. Back to Tara and Melodee. So guys, so happy that you guys are with us. And we also want to encourage you, if you're watching, let us know where you're watching from and drop us an encouraging note. Also share this video. Share this video so that others can see. So a few comments we have. Michelle Perez says, keep up the amazing work, ladies. I'm currently in New Jersey. Wonderful. Do we have some more comments to get to there as well? I want to see if we have any questions or anything else that was in the comments. Shannon and Brian Pickens says, watching from Star City, Arkansas. Thank you, ladies, for being great examples of faith in LAC. I can't wait to start this journey. We are LAC. Wonderful. Thank you, guys, for tuning in.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Victoria,
How are you?
love you, ladies. Thank you so much. And and Dave and Carol Ellis. Without a doubt, these are two awesome missionaries. We are privileged to have an LAC. They are definitely establishing the church in Latin America or Caribbean.
Oh,
Thank you.
thanks, Dave and Carol.
Wonderful, awesome, and so we want to keep going here. Want to talk with you guys. What is some bad advice that you've gotten as it relates to being a woman in ministry?
Bad advice.
I think it's always terrible advice when you hear or it's communicated, you must be perfect. And I don't think that that's just for women in ministry. I think that's life in general, but I think we can take that on ourselves and feel like there's no room for a mistake or for learning curve or for asking for help, and the need for perfection in every way. I think that is something that can just soak in without it being direct advice, or the you can't do that. I can't say that I had much, but every once in a while, you can't do that. That's not done. Would probably be the two things that come to mind when it comes to bad advice.
Like you're saying, like that can't be done. Like women don't do that sort of thing.
Women don't do that sort of thing. That, or even in terms of that ministry is that it's not going to fly. It's not a possibility, or you can't. Yeah, probably those two things.
Yeah. No, it's good.
Yeah, I would agree. And just the different perceptions. I think even as a little girl growing up, the women that I saw on the stage, again, my examples were usually they're doing music. And so, I grew up my whole life thinking, well, I better be good at music or I'm not going to have a place in the church. And what other ministry can I have? Because I didn't have the opportunity to see a lot of women in the pulpit or, teaching theology and all these nerdy things that I liked to do. And so I spent a whole lot of time trying to do trying to find my way into my public ministry. So I think, some of those things are just kind of subtleties of language and expectation. And again, the thing with the, I've been a little bit mom shamed for leaving my kids for different amounts of time to do ministry independently. And when I feel like in the mom shaming, it's also dad shaming because my husband's completely competent and excels at caring for our children for periods of time without me. So that's kind of bad advice. Like, well, you need to, you're going to have to step back now that you have kids. And I just think that that's not super empowering. I mean, if you see me struggling, that's one thing to, come blanket about my life.
You're going a little in and out, Tara. Sorry,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Maybe repeat that last sentence. I think you're back now.
Yeah, I think it's just sometimes, people making really generalized statements of what they think I should be dedicating my time to, rather than even inquiring about life. So, my close friends tell me, like, your son really seems to be a conversation. Somebody just saying, like, I don't know anything about my life or my family. So that's kind of bad advice. Like, you really should be stepping back right now because your kids are young or something like that. Those are really frustrating things. And as well as the first question we usually get as being women in service with a special song. So
sorry, you're still going in and out, Tara.
I'm sorry. Are you hearing me, Melodee?
In and out as well, but the special song part, I got that. Yeah,
Okay. All right.
that's surely what you must do, right? Yeah, I got that.
Why else would you
Yeah.
be here? Yeah, so that's kind of some of the bad advice. And, because I'm a loud, outspoken person, I have a strong opinion, I get told by women all the time that I have to just be quiet and not say things out loud. And so that's something that, again, I try to bless their hearts, see the heart behind it, that I have to weigh carefully the voice that I'm going to use, because I do not get a chance for it to be heard as often as perhaps some of my male colleagues would. So I do have to weigh carefully, but usually it just comes across as, shut up, nobody wants to hear from a girl.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. Now, transitioning, what is some good advice that you've received along the way, addressing some of these obstacles that you're talking about and how to overcome them?
I got real good advice. It was from Mona, actually, when we were stepping into teaching Isum as a couple. And she said, it's not often that a married couple comes in to teach together. That's unusual. And so students are really observing how you honor each other, how you each are fulfilling your giftings and your role, and giving each other room to flow in the areas. Like I'm as liable to shut up in the office working on administrative stuff while Larry's taking everybody out to coffee, and that relational piece is really one of his strengths. But the fact that kind of being aware of maybe presenting a different picture because these are ministry people, and maybe a picture of something that maybe they haven't seen before, or maybe affirm something that they're already doing. And so I think that gave me a little bit more freedom to kind of be okay with knowing that, wow, you guys, this is really different, who's in charge, or how are you working this out? And so being okay with knowing that this is just, it's an opportunity to role model a different way of doing things than maybe they've seen before. So that helped me a lot.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I think along those same lines, we're talking so often about several of the same women, Sandy Kasem and Mona. I think just making me really aware of the fact that there are women who have been pioneering and leading the way before me, and have opened channels of the space that I can now stand in. Mm-hmm. And to be grateful and thankful for that, and at the same time to guard it very carefully, to know how much sacrifice and hard work has gone into carving that space out, so that I can continue to carve it deeper and more definitively for the generation coming behind me. So I think it's just that constant awareness of those strong women in front of me, like, look, sister, we worked hard to give you that platform. So make sure that you honor it, make sure that you guard it and protect it, and that you're not careless with it. And so, again, because so many times the places that we have as women in ministry are delicate and fragile, and they do have to be guarded with a great deal of wisdom and generosity, and the sharing of the stage with other young women who are coming behind us. And so that, again, that's been modeled really beautifully to me, and it's affected me very deeply. It's like what I've dedicated to studying, the solidarity of women, advocating for each other. And so it's the thing that's affected my life the most, is even more than that spoken advice, the lived out example of how to be a woman in ministry.
Yes.
Wow, it's incredible, and it's amazing too that you guys both are that example to the people coming behind you and alongside of you as well. So thank you so much for taking the time just to talk and share your experiences. And I think from my perspective, well, we have a comment from Larry. He says, strong for all women. Thanks, Larry. But I know that this has been so eye-opening for me. And as a man, you're not aware of the lenses that you don't see through, and those things. And so I think we need to do more of things like this, where you're given a voice to really just start to talk freely about those things that you specifically face as women. So if you're watching this, once again, we're going to be ending about 5 minutes here, but I want to give you a chance to ask your questions to these awesome ladies. They have so much wisdom. And Catherine Figueroa says hi.
Hey. Hi, Catherine.
Hi,
amazing woman.
Right now. With us on this team.
That's amazing, and thanks, Catherine, for saying hi. And so kind of taking the last few minutes just to talk a little bit about how can things get better? How can obviously, how can men help with the situation? Because there's men watching as well. And then you talked a little bit about women and how they relate to each other and the advice they give each other. So in all of that, how can this missions environment that we live in, how can it be more supportive of women and missions and their specific callings, and especially as we talk about Assemblies of God, which is known for its theological belief that God calls women and as well as men, and you can be in any role. God's the sovereign caller, and yet sometimes practically there can be just as many obstacles within the Assemblies of God as there are within denominations who don't see that. So, your thoughts?
I'll just step out there and say that maybe one day there'll be a female area director. Not that, that, and maybe her husband is because they work as couples, but generally the feeling is that it must be the husband, or maybe that's just my perception. So, maybe someday that could happen. I think the more that you see people working in different areas, the more that it presents role models for women coming behind us. I think allowing people to work in their areas of giftings. So if the female of the spouse, the female spouse is really developing in an area of gifting, allowing her to kind of grow into that, whether it's in roles of leadership or speaking in a conference setting or teaching in that area, and kind of understanding that it doesn't need to be. I'm not saying this well, but it doesn't have to be the male simply because he's the husband, Yeah. And maybe that's my generation's perspective and nobody else sees it that way. But I don't know if that's seen as kind of a delicate subject, that if we invite the wife, what will that mean for her spouse? But if that's an area where the Lord is really using her, I'd like to see, that to be encouraged and doors open for her to continue walking into those places. So that would be, beyond that, I feel like one of the blessings of being a missionary is the freedom to be the woman God has called you to be. I don't feel like there are lots of, you must do this, that there's a lot of freedom that's given, I think, in the missionary world. to kind of be the woman that God has called you to be, whether it's wherever that focus is, and being able to champion that and celebrate that. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah.
Yes, I would agree with that exact sentiment, in that, as a woman in ministry and, working equally with your spouse, it, just like I mentioned at the very beginning of this interview, that, meeting Melodee was really a key moment in my life, to see somebody that represented me and what my aspirations were, and somebody that synced with what I felt God calling me to. Having that void in leadership, not seeing somebody like me in the leadership realm, I think is kind of echoing that same thing. Like that it does get frustrating. And again, we've been really blessed with powerful area director wives, and that's awesome. But they're the area director wives. But beyond that, I think that, for our brothers to kind of be aware of, I have a few key guy friends that, man, they just go the extra mile to shoot me a text now and then to just let me know you are doing a great job, and we affirm your leadership. And I have a few guys that connect me with other young women that they meet who kind of need somebody to encourage them in ministry, and that's always a really big honor. But I think a thing for men to be aware of is that oftentimes there's a little bit of a double standard about reading women's personalities. Oftentimes, women who have strong leadership capabilities and things that are praised and championed as characteristics and personality traits in men are kind of demonized in women. And so I think just kind of being aware, like when you feel yourself coming on with the thought of, wow, she's a really outspoken, pushy broad, those are the terms you hear a lot when there's a strong woman leader around. Maybe sit back and like, oh, is that a really real thing? Or am I just, I don't like seeing those kind of strong leaderships in a woman form. And so I think that, and again, as missionaries we have to become masters at cultural adaptation and fitting in and figuring out the crowd and being able to work your way in. I think that as missionary women in ministry, we're really great at that. And so we make the best of whatever is served to us. Because, if a man is going to give me more voice, if I don't know, fix my hair nice every time or whatever, we learn to do the things that open the doors for us. And so, and again, I think that's probably one of those negative things that I've learned of, if you have to charm your way into something, then act like you're quiet and not outspoken, and then you'll have a voice at the table. But I can hold up that act for, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes max, and then I crumbles. So if I have to rely on being a certain kind of woman to have my voice at the table, it's going to crash and burn pretty fast. So I think just being aware of, to have our brothers be aware of things that you might not like in somebody that you see as and it's usually those same things are said of all those women that have those kind of leadership skills. Again, praised in the male form and demonized in the woman form. And so I'm just being aware of that and affirming young women that you see doing ministry and leadership. Because again, those couple of guys, I have a couple peers, then a couple older guys are kind of, my parents' age, just affirming me. Those, man, that goes so far. I feel encouraged for months after just one little morsel of encouragement. So just to know that when you speak to young women in ministry, whether you're a woman or a man, that your words weigh heavily. Yes. And they do affect the psyche of that woman.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And we did have a question from Dave Ellis that he posted on there. So I wanted to get to this. He poses this question: what advice would you give young women that are praying about and considering missions? And I guess the second part, and with most of our single missionaries being women, what advice would you give young men considering missions? Does that make sense? So on the one hand, what advice would you give young women who are, young people who are considering missions, most of them being single women, but then specifically also, what advice would you give to the men who might be single men considering it as well?
I think talking specifically about single women, I've heard some say I won't go unless I'm married. I won't go until I'm married, because there is this perception perhaps of loneliness, or I'll never find somebody then, or and so I think that you're obedient to the call God has placed on your life, and you have to leave some of those things in His hands, and to start now, wherever you are in your life and in your place. Begin now. Begin developing ministry now. Opening, as God opens doors for opportunities, develop that now, because He leads into those next steps. And I do think that we've mentioned women championing women, and I do think that the women that are on our fields and among us that are single, we very much need to are our sisters, and they need to be seen as championed as well, and to try to avoid that perception that's out there of the single missionary being lonely and frustrated, and so that would be just encouraging them to just step out and let God pull those things together, to not make decisions out of fear, and just walk through the doors that God's opened, because it's impossible sitting where you are now to see the wonderful things that are ahead. You can only see so far, and and as your sisters, I think as us women, married folk, need to say, you're one of us, you're our sister, and we're there with you as well. I'll leave the young men to Tara.
I would definitely echo that. We have so many strong single women in the missions family. And so I think, for any woman considering missions to do it single, that, seek a few of those people out. They are a treasure trove of advice. And man, they're just, the first 5 or 6 I can just think of off the top of my head. They're just the best of the best of the best. And they'll show you that it can be done, and it can be done beautifully. And so don't be intimidated by that call if you are a single woman, or just waiting for the Lord to, meet the one desire of being married before going on the mission field, like Melodee mentioned. But I think if you're a young man, it's hard for young men. I don't even know, does AGWM let single men? Yeah, they do.
There are a few.
Yeah, it's not entirely common, but again, the call is the call, and you have to be obedient. And nobody experiences movement by standing still, and so you have to actually be in motion, I think, to be guided anywhere into anything by the Holy Spirit. You can't be like the donkey being pulled by the bridle. So I think that that's an important thing, and I don't know how much more I have to offer for young men. I haven't been one, or not sure.
Anything else you wanted to talk to add to encouraging young single women or young women who are considering missions? Tara, specifically?
Yeah, I think just go for it. Fulfill the dreams that the Lord's laid on your heart. Do the preparation necessary to be able to fill those roles. I know that like now in my current studies and aspirations, I wish I would have taken more theology classes. I wish that I went to bent to the expectation even when I was in Bible school, because like now I have a hunger, and I'm going back to do those things. And at the same time, I would encourage people not to worry about, I hear a lot of young people saying, well, God hasn't spoken specifically, or so I'm just going to wait for it. Or you hear a lot of young women say, well, I'm not exactly sure what to do. And so until I hear, well, the fact of the matter is that the consequences of mistakes are not life-threatening. Mm-hmm. And so there's just, when you take a step of obedience, even in being unsure, the Lord is not like waiting to be like, I tricked you. That was not the right choice. You guessed wrong. Yeah, and so it's just not the God that we serve. He's going to use every step and every decision that you make under his obedience to make you more useful for his kingdom. And it's just, so like I said, I wish that I would have done that. Well, it's not a huge deal. I'm just catching up now. And so the consequences of these decisions they're not final. They're not critical. They're not, they're just bumps along our journey. And so if you're kind of on the fence about it, just take the step, go ahead and try the thing, and let the Lord open more doors for you. And again, it's like Melodee said, if you can just get yourself into a place that is new and uncomfortable, so many more doors that you can't even see from your current perspective are going to be open to you. Opportunities and friendships and relationships that you could have never had, or bigger dreams that you could have never imagined yourself having in this current time in your life. And so I think just that forward motion always, and not worrying. Something I always say is that God is not a plan B God. Like if I ever hear people say, God's plan B, I'm always like, that's not a thing. My God's so much bigger than a plan B. And so, if things don't work out as expected, God still has his perfect sovereign thing ahead for you. And he will use all of the heartache or the fear of, or the failure that you've experienced to make something bigger, more beautiful, more wonderful than ever. It's not a consolation plan B. And like, you messed this up, kid, now you get junk. And so I kind of grew up thinking that in my own faith. And so I just want to encourage people that, so I think that sometimes holds people back from missions, to say like, well, I haven't really lived my whole life. My testimony doesn't match those wonderful, perfect missionaries. Right. I think that holds people back too. And that's just not the God we serve. He is so gracious and he's so big to redeem every single thing that we play before him, whether we make those things, those mess ups in our life of strong champion faith, or whether we make them in weakness and in sinful states. And so I would just encourage people to not be afraid of making decisions, not be afraid of taking risks and doing things that you feel the Lord prompting you to do.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. That's incredible. And that is, you've both given so much for everyone to chew on, and to to go back and watch through this whole video and to start taking notes and putting those things into practice. And so I wish we had a hand clap for you guys that we could hear through the internet. But thank you to everyone who tuned in, and thank you for your comments and your generous encouragement. And I think we need a part 2 of this as well. There's so much more to talk about, but thank you, both of you, Melodee and Tara, for taking the time for sharing a little bit of your journeys, and it's just incredible. And so we look forward to hopefully hearing from you guys again, and we just pray that God blesses both of you and your ministry and your families, and continues to lead you and guide you. So thank you so much for being a part of Coffee with a Missionary.
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Have a great night, and we'll see everybody next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Love you, Tara. Bye.